Hello, folks. Welcome to Holding On with Holder, where I talk with interesting people about interesting topics. My name is Steve Holder, and I am your host. My guest this evening is Dakyndre Helgesson, and we will be discussing the role paganism has played in America and how America has affected paganism. Hello, Dak.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
Good to have you here. So, we talked a little bit about paganism the last time that we talked. We really didn't get into it deep and how it's all played into America and how one has affected the other and all of that. So, do you want to start us out by just saying what is paganism for those who don't even know what we're talking about?
Absolutely. Um, it's an umbrella term, like that kind of describes a multitude of different spiritual paths. You can have, like I said previously, you can have Wiccans, you can have Druids, you can have Norse practitioners who practice Asatru, you can have people who follow the Egyptian pantheon, shamans. It's kind of like saying Christian. I'm Christian, but then you can get into the denominations of whether you're Baptist or whether you're, Episcopalian or,
Yeah.
Quaker. So a pagan has kind of become a modern term of just a broad view of paths that all pretty much are anything that is not of the sort of mainstream Christian
Okay.
followings.
Okay. And how old is paganism?
That one is complicated. Most of what's around right now today is, in essence, modern uh, revivalized versions. Paganism as a whole pretty much died out in the 4th century. Uh, Church conversions, things like that. And then right around the 1500s, there started to be a revival of looking into that sort of thing. So some things have existed for a while, and then a lot of what's here now is within the last probably 500 years, and some of it is put together based off of old information, like for example, like the Druidry and most of, like I mentioned, Asatru, the Norse. There isn't any, we can't say, oh, well, these documents are, from 6,000 years ago, because they're not that old. And additionally, they were oral traditions. So what we have surviving is a lot of what was written down by Christian missionaries and Catholic missionaries. And so it's somewhat biased, but a lot of it's been around for a while, but
Yeah.
it gets complicated.
So were any of our founding fathers in America pagans?
Not that not that we can tell, like, where they openly identified. Um However, when you do look at, while they themselves weren't necessarily practicing pagans, they were absolutely influenced by what you would consider pagan ideology, in that you look at our Congress, our Senate, all of that, those came, democracy, the ideas of that, those came out of the Greek and Roman cultures. Those were very much, polytheistic societies.
Yeah.
And then you get into little things like a symbol that every American recognizes, the Statue of Liberty, is based off of the Roman goddess Libertas, which was the goddess of freedom. Go to any courtroom and you're going to see, Lady Justice, the scales and the sword and the blindfold.
Mhm.
That's a Greek goddess Themis, who was a goddess of justice. So
I didn't know that.
throughout our society, there are pagan tendencies but I wouldn't say that you could look at and at it and be like, well, Thomas Jefferson, actively practiced, but they
Yeah.
were influenced by a wide range of ideas.
What about holidays that we celebrate in America? Which ones came from pagan roots?
Um, Obviously Halloween, that trades back to the old Samhain festival of the new year. That was a Celtic one. Christmas was put on the calendar at the 25th to coincide with Yule. And there's over the time they've kind of meshed together traditions that have just become accepted. Easter was another one because it's gotten meshed in where there's eggs, bunnies, that sort of stuff. Had nothing to do with Christianity, but the Catholic Church combined a lot of the pagan celebrations at times to make it easier for people to convert, because it was, oh, well, you don't have to give up your traditions. We have some events that we can just kind of mesh the two together, and look, they coincide.
Yeah.
So a lot of our American holidays are, quite a few of them have very pagan roots to them.
Yeah. Now you mentioned Easter. Wasn't there a goddess called Ishtar?
Yes.
Like that?
I haven't researched a whole lot into that. There was a different goddess that was connected to Easter that was not the Ishtar one. Is very loosely done. The
Okay.
people that have tried to tie that in ignored a bunch of stuff. So I'd have to dig deeper into that one, but
Yeah.
it's not a correct correlation.
How about the days of the week and the names of the months? Weren't there some pagan gods in there?
Yes, most of the days of the week are actually connected to Norse things. Wednesday was known for being the day for Odin. Thursday was Thor's day. Those had actual Nordic correlations, and they might even go to some of the months. I can't remember. There was something connecting those as well.
Yeah.
So very much again, sort of just mild pagan influences onto what people don't even think of much
Yeah.
day to day.
So how has paganism evolved since it came to America? Or how has it affected America, and how has America affected paganism? How has that worked?
Um, it's been both ways in a sense. Especially the last, I would say, 100 years. Paganism's always been here, but I would say that it wasn't until the last 100 years that we've seen the freedoms that we wouldn't find in other countries. So America's aspects of freedom and the ability for all of us to be a different faith without someone, killing us for it, hasn't always existed in other countries. If you go to the Philippines, for example, if you are not I think Buddhist and one other religion, they'll kill you. You can actually face death.
Yeah.
So in the US, it has allowed us the freedom to expand and practice safely. Also, unlike anywhere else in the world, with so many different cultures coming into the US, you have a blending pot, not just of cultures, but of religion, to where you start to see different aspects of things that might be commonly done in Europe or might have been done in Ireland or Asia that are blended in and become parts of other paths. So it kind of has allowed for, like I said, that blending pot to exist.
Yeah.
Let's see. And then in the 50s, it really took off, like 50s, late 60s, because you started to get people like Gerald Gardner, who was considered the founding father of Wicca. His books and all of that, you started to see a turning point of people not having to hide. So it very much, though, the two have affected each other.
So would you say publishing in America has had a big effect on it?
Yeah, because it became something that could be published. It became something that you didn't have to. You still, depending on things where you live, like rural areas, it can be very harsh to grow up in those environments. But overall, you don't have to worry about the government coming in or the state coming in and killing you. So
Yeah.
publishing, it makes it easy to get the information out.
Yeah. Now, there's probably hundreds or maybe thousands of pagan authors in the United States now, right?
There's quite a few. Yeah, some people self-publish. Some people go through companies and they will publish. Yeah, there's tons of information out.
Yeah. Has there been any past presidents of the United States that were pagan?
None openly that, none that you could look at that person and go, yeah, that guy was a pagan. And I think that a lot of that has to do with, especially the last 20 years, the culture, society as a whole has been changing. Prior to that, it still was very much if they weren't a Christian appearing individual, they weren't going to get elected. That just
Yeah.
didn't exist. And especially the last 20 years, that started to change. So no presidents that we can say were openly pagan, inside their own homes. Who knows? There could have been a president that, looked at, Vishnu or some god or goddess and decided, yeah, I'll follow them in the confines of my own home.
Yeah. So are there any pagans in our Senate and Congress presently that you know of?
Not that we know of actively. Again, it wouldn't surprise me if in the next 10, 15 years, something like that happened, because up until 2013, you didn't even used to see, gay or lesbian congressmen, members. That just didn't happen.
Yeah.
And within the last 7, 8 years, especially, it's gotten to the point where now you get, all of these politicians who are the first woman in this office, or the first lesbian in this one. You have the first, gay governor of, a state.
Yeah.
So it's become not as much of an issue. So I think as the culture matures and starts to accept that there are other ideas, then you may start to see, that sort of thing happen.
Yeah. Now, is it true that there's a bigger percentage of gays in paganism than maybe in traditional religions?
No, I've met a lot of the gays and like lesbians I know. Quite a few of them are agnostic, don't believe anything.
Yeah.
Some are still, Christian in their own confines, not like they go to a church and are accepted.
Yeah.
So it really varies. I would say that a lot do tend to drift towards paganism, but it's not like a requirement, or I think it's just that being that there's more of an open-mindedness,
Yeah,
it might be a little more of an accepting place.
yeah. Has there ever been, or is there now, any Supreme Court judges that are pagan?
Again, not that have ever openly admitted it. None that I can point at. Similar reasons. I just think that predominantly with Christianity having had such a hold on society, it wouldn't have ever. I mean, at one point, if you tried to come out and say that you were going to run for office and you didn't believe in Christianity, you wouldn't have even gotten votes. So trying to get to the Supreme Court and be a pagan, they wouldn't have done it. So, but
Yeah.
that could change again as well.
Yeah. Now, pagans are generally very tolerant of other religions, correct?
Yes, generally there are individuals that when they first leave other faiths, you will see resentment at first from some. But overall, pagans as a whole are very often generally tolerant of other faiths, even when that courtesy is not reciprocated to us.
Such as?
Such as when I first started actively practicing early 2000s, little before then, late 90s. One of my first jobs when I wore a pentacle out on my neck, I actually had a pastor's wife who worked in the facility I was at tell me that she should rip that off my neck. So she was physically willing to, she literally said that if she wouldn't have gotten arrested for it, she would have, pretty much physically assaulted me. In the late 90s, I remember a story of a 13-year-old girl in New York who got strangled to death with her necklace by some guy that was religious and not necessarily all there.
Yeah.
So there's been, at some places, it has cost us jobs. I know people where the boss finds out you're pagan and the next thing you know, you're let go.
Yeah.
So we tend to very much be like live and let live, but it does tend to be, I've had people in college who found, like friends who found out I was pagan, and they were like, well, I'm Christian, we can be friends, but just so you know, you're my enemy. And I just had to look at them and be like, you do realize that is such a contradiction.
Yeah. And an insult.
We cannot be both friends and enemies. That just doesn't
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always reciprocate back.
Yeah.
Know.
You're in Hawaii. That's pretty liberal state, isn't it?
Yes, and very much more of a sort of easy kind of flowing. There are some people that move out here and you find a lot more of the sort of conservative, or even not necessarily just conservative, but just the intolerance. But the locals themselves are very much more of a, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
You do you.
Well, wasn't there, what was the name of the original religion of the Hawaiians? Wasn't it kind of a pagan religion at one time?
It was very much, because you had Pele and the fire goddess, you had Lano, you had Cain, you had a bunch of other it was a very polytheistic culture. And in fact, when the Christian missionaries and the Catholic missionaries got over here, they actually had a really hard time at first getting the Hawaiians to convert, because they would be like, we're here to tell you about our God. And they were like, oh, cool. We'll include him too. And the missionaries are like, no, 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 no. You have to follow just him.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We'll include him we'll follow him on Sundays and we'll do this on the other days. And they're like, no.
There had to be a lot of compromising that they weren't willing to do. Yeah.
It was a very interesting at first
Yeah.
situation.
So were you ever not a pagan?
Yes, I actually was raised from a very young age in predominantly Christian homes. I went to Sunday school, sang on the church choirs. I was homeschooled at one point, also went to private Christian schools. So up until about 14, yeah, I was very much, youth group members of my church were all I hung out with. It was very much a time where I wasn't pagan.
Yeah. Well, didn't they warn you about people like you?
They did. And additionally, what changed me in the long run was I actually got out of very strict controlled homes where, like I told you, some of the homes I lived in, if you were not part of my homeschool program, my church, or something along my family friend type thing, we did not hang out with you. If, I didn't, until I was 14, I really hadn't listened to a whole lot of other music other than when I was really, really young. I had listened to oldies and I listened to Christian music and classical. That was it.
Yeah.
Until I was about 14, I hadn't heard any other type of music. It wasn't played on the radio. So, yeah, we were warned very much. But what led me to actually leave being a Christian was that once I got out of that environment and in essence had the chance to breathe and sort of start thinking for myself, I came to the realization that I had also and I won't say all Christians do it because to give a blanket statement, I disagree with, but a large majority of Christianity teaches that Catholics aren't Christian.
Mhm.
Catholics view themselves as Christian, but Christians don't view Catholics. And I got to the point where at about 13, 14, I started realizing that if someone told me they were Buddhist, I had an issue with them. If someone told me they were Pentecostal, I had an issue with them because they weren't following my branch of Christianity. They were automatically someone to be not trusted, someone being misguided by the devil, and I was automatically taught not to like them.
Yeah.
And I came to the realization that I had absolutely no idea what it was I was disliking.
Yeah.
And so I started at like 14 going, well, I don't know anything about Buddhism. Why don't I like it? It's not enough to dislike it because I've been told to. And so I decided to start studying Buddhism, and I decided to start studying all of these different spiritualities that I had been warned to stay away from. And the more I did so, the more I eventually reached a point where I could no longer feel that I could follow Christianity as it is taught in most churches. And so I had to walk away because
Yeah.
I said, I need to explore this. And in order to do it, in some cases, I need to start meditating. I need to start trying to figure out what Buddhism is. I need to start practicing these things. And I couldn't do that and still, in a sense, claim to be a practicing Christian that any church would recognize.
Yeah. I remember when I was, I think maybe 8 or 9 years old, there's a little Catholic boy up the street that I wanted to play with, and we were Southern Baptist. And my mom told me very clearly that I could not play with that Catholic boy. And I said, what does that mean? I didn't know.
Right.
Yeah. But now I'm actually a Catholic, so she would really
So,
turn over in the grave, I guess.
so you understand where I'm coming from,
Yeah.
that there is a lot of intolerance that is subtly taught.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't, after a while, I also didn't feel the connection that everyone else did. I looked around and I had too many questions, and I couldn't. My pastor, shortly before I left the church as the faith as a whole, I actually had a pastor who at like 9 or 10 years old kicked me out of church because I was asking questions, and my questions, he told me, would cause the adults around me to, possibly question their faith. And I was like, I'm sorry, then I can't follow this. I need to know why I'm following something.
Yeah.
And the simple answer of, well, we're not meant to understand God, or this is just the way it is, it didn't work for me. I needed to be able to be like, this is what I follow and why.
I don't think God is scared of questions. I doubt very seriously that is threatened by questions.
Right.
I've met many, well, not many, I've met some Christians that used to be pagans, and I've met pagans that used to be Christians. And it's not unusual for people to change their religions.
No.
One or maybe several times in their life.
And from my feeling anyway, the more that I discovered about most of the other religions on the planet, the more I discovered that there are a lot of very interesting similarities between all of them, to the point that I think the only divisions we allow are ones that we have created out of ego. There seems to be an underlying truth to almost every religion that I've encountered. The general narrative seems to be more or less the same story in different platforms.
Yeah. Love and tolerance comes in, and humility in pretty much all of them.
Right, right.
Yeah. So, what's the common denominator that all people who call themselves pagans have to accept? Is there one thing that just totally everybody in paganism says, well, I've got this?
That question actually gave me a lot of thought, because I had to think and go, is there a common denominator? Because some of us are monotheistic, some of us are polytheistic, some of us are eclectic in that we'll work with, this deity from, Egyptian and this one from here. So I was like, trying to find a common thread was difficult at first. But what I came to, and it seems to be a very common equation for all of us, is that we do not like to be confined to one box or one label. We like to be able to explore, to find our curiosity. And in that seems to be very, very much common amongst all pagans, that, even if someone identifies as, say, a Wiccan, where they believe in one god, one goddess, that's their primary deity structure. If they are in meditation and all of a sudden they feel that the Egyptian goddess Isis calls to them, they like to be able to be like, okay, we'll add this into the mix and it doesn't cause issues. So the non-conformity seems to be a very much of a common thing, because it allows us a freedom that you don't find in a lot of the mainstream religious structures.
Yeah. What do you say to people that say, well, you really serve Satan, but you just don't know it?
I get that one all the time, and I always kind of laugh at that notion because it's a very egocentric statement to make, because it is assuming that your path is the only path that is out there. Do I believe the Christian God exists? Yes. Do I believe Satan exists? Well, if the other gods exist, then yes, he has to exist as well. The difference is, do I believe that either of them can directly influence me? No. Any more than Canada telling us that we're going to switch currencies has any relevance on our system. I view it the same way. So to be like, well, you're serving Satan, I don't follow that path. Therefore, the very notion that I'm doing that seems incredibly misguided.
Yeah. Well, I think people that would tell you that would think that you're terribly misguided.
Correct.
Like the
And that's
pastor's
where I
wife that you
say,
mentioned, yeah.
right. And that's where I've always said, you know what, in your faith, I understand that's what that means, and you're
Yeah.
free to believe that.
Yeah.
You're not free to, fire me for it or kick me out of a house for it, because the freedom of religion that we enjoy means all religions, even if we don't necessarily agree with it. So it does, like I said, seem very hard to be like, to accept it. I've always found it very just kind of funny, because it's like, that's like me telling you that, if you go step out of line, you're going to my version of afterlife punishment. You're just going to look at me and go, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just doesn't work. So
Yeah. I think sometimes people forget, if a certain thing is my religion, that means I practice that. It doesn't mean that everybody else has to.
right. And
And that,
that's what's not misunderstood,
yeah,
is you see people too often who, it's like, well, you see it in the news all the time, like, couple gets in trouble for not baking a cake,
yeah,
and it's like, well, that violates my religious freedom.
yeah,
Yes, but you run a bakery that bakes cakes. You're not being told you can't. You're not being told you can't be a practicing Christian. You're being told you can't use that faith as a reason to deny someone else a service.
yeah.
That's I think the difference is people don't understand. They assume that religious freedom means that they should be allowed to impose their religion on everyone.
Yeah. Now, has your wife the same beliefs as yours?
Different variations, but yes, wasn't when we first met. Was actually, but yeah, different path. But yeah, and we tend to do very different. Mine, I tend to draw very heavily from Asatru on a lot of things, because my heritage is predominantly Scandinavian country. So I tend to use that as a way of connecting to my ancestors.
Yeah.
My other half has very much more of a tendency to work with the Greek pantheon. Um, Me personally, I can't stand them, but that's, each of us does our own thing.
Mhm. So what would you like all the non-pagans to know about pagans?
Um, Predominantly, like we touched on, is that we're very much not evil. I know it's very hard because most are going to still assume that we are misguided, but I've had discussions with Christian pastors and things like that, who, when they sat down and really we talked without, in a sort of almost non-judgmental setting, we reached an agreement to where we agree to disagree, but they were very much realized that we are nature-based. We are not sitting in a dark basement, summoning a demon any more than, anyone else would want to. We're just, so it's very much, we're just as normal as everyone else.
Yeah. And you don't have 666 tattooed on your chest?
Nope. That would be more of a Satanist, but again, you would be filing it still under you would almost be, in that case, you're dealing with still the Christian concept, just the antithesis of that. No, we don't do 666. We're not, running around, doing dark rituals to Satan. We don't choose to acknowledge that concept. Myself personally, I tend to believe in reincarnation. So the idea that I die and go one place or the other, and that's where I'm stuck forever, that doesn't even factor into my personal practice.
Yeah. Now, what's the relationship between paganism and the occult? Or is there necessarily a connection?
There really isn't, other than one that's been misplaced, because the word occult simply means hidden. So with that mindset, if you have a Christian monastery that only shows certain books to, high-level members or to special requested members, they would technically practice in the occult. Freemasonry, same thing. We have information as Freemasons that isn't shared with the general public. That could be considered an occult connection. When you look at the word meaning simply hidden, then yes, some covens, kindreds, different, druidry groves, those people, if they have anything that is written specifically for their group, then that would be considered an occult practice. It's been misinterpreted to mean magic and, all things dark, but it's only because it's a misuse of the word.
Yeah. So how many pagans are there around the world?
As I touched on earlier, really hard to gauge. It could be anywhere from 5 to 10 million. It could be more, it could be less. Unlike the US, where a lot of us have the freedom to identify, as I said, go to the Middle East, identify as a pagan or any other faith, and you're going to be dead in a square. Go to the Philippines, same thing. So a lot of pagans tend to be what's called in the closet. They practice within the confines of their house, but when they leave the house, there's no tattoos, there's no rings, it's not on their social media. They set things up in their bedrooms that look, innocent, and something in there might actually be one of their magical items, but it doesn't look it.
Right.
So it's much harder globally to predict how many there actually are.
And what percentage of Americans do you think there might be pagan?
That have actually been documented, it was like in 2018, there was a study done, and it was like 0.4 or 0.5% of the population, which is roughly anywhere between like 1.5 to 2 million. I would estimate it's probably somewhere in the 2.5, maybe even higher. Again, because if you live in, as you do, the Bible Belt, and specifically a rural town, you aren't going to be coming out very often as an active pagan because one of the towns I grew up in when I was younger, in my late teens, like early 20s, there were 3,000 people. I kid you not, there were 18 churches. So to be an actively practicing pagan in a town of 3,000 to 4,000 people and 18 churches, you might as well just put a bullseye on yourself.
That sounds a lot like East Tennessee. Well, yeah, we joke around and say, well, there's a church on every corner, and that's not too much of an exaggeration.
So again, the number in the US could be much higher.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't even answer the survey, honestly. So in the last 20 years, though, it's grown quite a bit.
There's quite a few open pagans in my area, quite a few. We have a university, and I think that has a lot to do with it. A lot of people come in from different parts of the world, different. So
Yeah.
Plus we have
any places.
School, yeah. So it's,
yeah, and a lot of times, any place you see, in essence, the free exchange of thoughts and ideas, and you tend to get a more educated, in a sense, population. You tend to see a lot more open things because the exchange of ideas is so prevalent that people don't feel threatened.
Yeah. Exchanging ideas is not real popular these days,
No,
especially when you
really
get into
isn't.
politics. That's like, if you ain't like me, you are wrong, you're evil, I don't want nothing to do with you.
I have family members that don't talk to each other because one of them is Republican, one of them is Democrat, and each has bought into the bizarre paranoia and hostility to the fact that they no longer will talk to each other.
Oh yeah, there's a lot
because
of
their
here.
political beliefs. And I'm sitting here going, that is the dumbest reason on the planet not to talk to someone.
Yeah. There's a lot of that around here. A lot of it. Well, Dak, I have definitely enjoyed talking to you as usual, brother.
It's been a pleasure. I enjoy the conversations.
Well, thank you very much, and enjoy that sunshine. It's pitch black where I am. It's
yeah, it's only 3:10 for me.
Oh, is it? Okay. Well, you have a wonderful afternoon and evening. I'll send you the link to this when it's uploaded. And
all right.
Thanks again.
My pleasure.
All right. You have a wonderful evening.
You too. Bye.